Welcome to Why We're Fans. I'm Duran, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Gennaro.
In all of our episodes, we cover the past, present, and the future of all your favorite NFL football teams.
We love hearing your stories, talking the NFL draft, and reminiscing about the good old days.
If you like the same, be sure to subscribe to this channel and like this episode. And leave a comment below if you want to answer any of our questions.
Follow us on Twitter to stay up to date on our latest interviews. And like we always say, win or lose, we're all fans. Enjoy this episode.
What's going down? Welcome back to another episode of Why We're Fans. I'm Gennaro, that's Duran, and joining us today is someone from Chicago representing the Bears. We got Usayd.
How's it going, man?
I'm doing well, guys. What's going on? Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course, man. Your team, of course, the Bears have tons of history just with their franchise and stuff, and we all know they've been in the news lately, especially regarding this quarterback stuff. You never know. There might be some big changes coming there soon. And, yeah, can't wait to dig into it.
Oh, yeah. We know free agency is starting off. You guys haven't made some noise yet, but I know something's got to be coming, man. I'm excited for it. I always get excited when players go to new teams. So it's good time. But, yeah, let's give it a little shot. I know I sound like a broken record, but bear with me. No pun intended. Shout out to Iron Ox Brewery for the 4-pack of the Oximus Prime.
Got the same thing.
Sure, it's going to be delicious.
Hey, man, I don't know if you saw Kyle Long is trying out for a couple teams. Did you see that? I know he was injured. I don't know. Do you think he'll hold up this time around?
It's hard to say, because every single year that he was in Chicago, besides his rookie season and then his second to last season, I believe, or I think the 2019 off season. So those are the only 2 years he didn't have surgery. Yeah. Now, in terms of holding up, I think that after having been out of, football for a year, just how much is he healthy? Yeah. But is he in football shape, and can his body handle the grind of a 16-game season, especially after all the surgeries and the previous injury history that he had? Is he ready to handle that? I'm not entirely sure. So, he's going to, I know the Raiders have a visit scheduled with him. The Chiefs have a visit scheduled with him. Those, to my knowledge, are the only two teams that have a visit lined up with him. But I would definitely say I think, he'll hold up, but it's just going to be can he handle the longevity and grind of a 16-game season?
Yep. Might be 17 games.
Oh, yeah, it might be 17.
Fingers crossed. All right, G, you ready to dive in?
Yeah, man, let's get into it, man. I'm pretty excited about this one. Like you said, a lot of history, so it's always fun. But all right, first things first, man. How did it all start? How did you start becoming a Bears fan?
So it's interesting because I was born in New York, and my dad lived in New York throughout the 70s and 80s. He grew up there, right? So he was a Giants fan. Growing up, I lived in New York for about 8 years, but I really fell in love with the NFL when my family moved out here to Chicago. So I was 10 years old at the time, so it's been 13, 14 years now. So really for me, the way I became a Bears fan is watching Bears Packers back in 2007 on Sunday Night Football at Lambeau Field,
Hell yeah.
So for a lot of people, when the Bears have the Bears have one of the biggest fan bases in the NFL, right? And you have some people that just fall in love with the Bears because they move here to Chicago and everyone's wearing Bears jerseys and Bears merchandise and stuff. You have some people who are born into it. And there's someone like me who, my, dad and his two brothers grew up watching a completely different team living in a different market. But I just became a Bears fan because of that Bears Packers connection. So that rivalry, I think, was always the coolest aspect of it to me. And I've been on other podcasts where I've had this exact same debate, and people have asked me, they've been oh, well, the NFL can exist without the Bears. And I'm no, quit BSing with me here. The NFL you can't have the NFL today, but not have the Bears and not have the Packers either. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I became a Bears fan.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a good gridiron, rivalry right there, man. I don't know who said you can play without the Bears, man, but Bears need to be in the NFL for sure. That's a stupid comment.
Yeah, we know that you're constantly reporting on all the moves and all the free agency and stuff like that. What's your game day setup looking like? Do you like to watch the game alone? Do you watch it with some friends, or do you go out to like a bar and meet up with other Bears fans?
It honestly just depends week to week, right? So like there's been certain times where like I've gotten a media pass, which has been awesome. I'm actually in the press box covering the game. Obviously, I don't do this full time yet, but I hope to get to the point where it is full time some days. But like, usually game day setup for me just includes like watching it alone. I friends will ask me, they'll be like, yo, do you want to go out to like B-dubs or something? And I'm like, yeah, we'll see, because I know if I'm at B-dubs and I'm watching the game as a fan, there's just so much other stuff that like I can't do as an actual reporter, because like the website I write for, Bear Report, we have like, we're a subscription-based website. And so we have things like VIP chats for all the subscribers where they can kind of interact with the journalists, things of that nature. So I know that if I go to B-dubs, right, there's no way that I'm going to be able to like sit in front of my laptop and then keep up with all the stuff in the VIP chat and then just report on everything that's like happening on Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of which, can you go ahead and plug your work and your Twitter handle so people can find you?
Yeah, guys, you can follow me on all my social media platforms, which is Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Usayd Koshul. So it's pretty simple, just my first and last name. I have the same like profile picture for all of them. So once you see one, you'll know that, and then you see the other 3 or 4, you'll know that they're the exact same and it's me.
Hell yeah. Well, Duran will put all the information in the description below, so you guys make sure to follow this guy. I mean, he's got the inside lock on the Bears right now. So
hell yeah. One thing that I got to know, have you been to Soldier Field? Have you got to see? Oh, you have. You get media passes. Well, what's your favorite thing about Soldier Field? It's one of the, oldest stadiums around and definitely has a big presence in the NFL.
Yeah, I would say, well, number one, the location, because there's not a lot of stadiums that like, are right next to the Chicago skyline and then right next to the lake. And then obviously Lakeshore Drive is the really beautiful drive, especially in the summer months. So, just the location's pretty awesome, number one. And then number two, just when you hear the crowd at Soldier Field, right? Like, it is really awesome, as well as the introductions and stuff that the Bears have for their specific players. That's probably my favorite part about Soldier Field. Now, obviously for me, like, I don't watch the game as a fan much. I watch it more so as just like a reporter, because that's kind of what I get paid to do. And so I have to be like objective in, all my analysis and anything and everything related to the Bears. I can't necessarily be biased, but it's just cool about Soldier Field in terms of like where it's at, the location, the history, as well as just the game day atmosphere that's there.
If I were to visit it, do you have any tips for me?
Yeah, so if you're in Chicago, right, and the thing is this, right, is you're better off going ahead and just taking like an Uber or Lyft to Soldier Field, because the parking lots by the stadiums are going to be like $60, and it's just like, who's going to pay, $60 to park their car in a stadium for like whatever, 5 or 6 hours?
Yeah.
So definitely take an Uber. They have like, special buses and stuff that run to Soldier Field as well, that shuttle people back and forth. And then also in terms of food, if you're in Chicago, this isn't just exclusive to Soldier Field, but if you're in the Chicagoland area in general, pizza, check out Giordano's or Lou Malnati's. All right. Also check out Portillo's. All right. Get their chocolate cake. It's going to be the best Italian beef that you're probably going to find in the US.
Nice. Yeah. I'm sold.
Yeah, you had me at chocolate cake.
Yeah, hopefully when stadiums start opening back up, we could start visiting some out-of-state places again.
Have you been able to go to any stadiums besides Soldier Field?
I actually have not, so Soldier Field's been like my biggest one, or the only one that I've gone to, but I do have a intriguing checklist, right? So like, I really want to visit Lambeau Field, because again, there's just so much history there, and it's one of the iconic stadiums in the NFL. Yeah. I've always wanted to go check out I know the Rams and Chargers, that new stadium that's been open for like a year, but I want to go check that out. Definitely want to, head down to Dallas to watch a Cowboys game, just because I think that would be a really cool experience as well. Just because it's been about a decade since, Jerry World was like the new standard for NFL stadiums. And then even the 49ers, it's another franchise. The 49ers, the Steelers, those are two other franchises that have so much more history. So I'd love to go watch a game at Levi Stadium and Heinz Field as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those, I mean, I've been
Those
to
are good
Levi.
ones. I want to make my way down to LA as well.
Yeah, same here. One stadium I actually want to go to is the Arizona Stadium. I haven't been there yet. I hear great things. I know it's like the number one. It's like near the top of like NFL fans like wanting to go. So I'm curious about that field for sure.
Oh yeah. What was your first Bears jersey?
First Bears jersey, it was Jay Cutler back in, I think I was in like 6th or 7th grade when the Bears went ahead and traded for Cutler. Yeah. And so obviously I didn't get the real thing. Like my mom went to Walmart and bought some like knockoff one, but I was like, oh, this is cool Cutler jersey, So that was obviously my first one. And then second one was Brian Urlacher. And then I went through a weird phase where I just didn't buy jerseys for like the longest of time. But then this past summer, Fanatics had a deal. So I spent like $200 on a Roquan Smith, Akeem Hicks, and Cleo Mack jersey, just because when it comes to me in jerseys, the big thing is this: I'm not just gonna like buy them for the sake of buying them, because like there's certain players that like, all right, they could be on the team for 3 or 4 years, and then that's about it, right? So what I really want to spend like $100 and only have this jersey mean something for like 3 or 4 years, and then so for me, what it is I only buy them if they're like going to be core players for the longest of time. And like people have asked me, they're like, oh, well, what jerseys are you getting in 2021? And I'm like, we'll see. Probably a Darnell Mooney. I might think about getting an Eddie Jackson. And then also just, depending on who the Bears draft this year, in the 2021 draft, right? I would seriously have to see. I've already told myself I'm not drafting, or I'm not buying a rookie quarterback jersey, just because like that guy doesn't pan out, then like that jersey is just going to sit in my closet forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good move.
For sure.
Good move. I know sometimes it's frowned upon for media members and stuff like that to ask for autographs, but do you have any signed memorabilia or anything like that?
So I actually do not. And it's one of the things where as a media member, because the Bears have like one of the stingiest PR departments in the NFL. And like my publisher, he does this full time. And he's like, look, you're not allowed, like, not even just me in general, but we're not allowed to like ask for autographs or things of that nature, But one of the cool things about that, or one of the cool things about having that media access, just in terms of you get to see not even see all the behind the scenes stuff, but you get to talk to the players, and you talk to like any NFL player, you realize that like, all right, so casual fans, like just fans in general, right? They view these guys like, Allen Robinson or Khalil Mack or like Eddie Jackson, let's say, as like players first, right? But then you begin to peel back the layers and you're like, holy shit, there is so much more to these guys than just the football aspect of things. I know there's one player in the locker room right now who's just like really into sneakers, and like collecting shoes and stuff. There's another one, I forgot the beat writer's name, but he ended up talking to Akeem Hicks about things like marriage and just like relationships in general, so the cool thing about being a kind of getting to go behind the scenes and talk to the players a lot is just you learn so much more about who they are as a genuine person than just the football player.
Yeah, that's more valuable than any memorabilia. I would love to do that.
Yeah, and you get to know these guys on a personal level. That's pretty much. I bet it's got to be hard though. Like when you get to know these guys on a personal level, the next year they're either traded or cut. That's.
Or you got to write an article about them doing bad or something.
Yeah, it's you mentioned writing the article. I actually had one story. This is during the 2019 season, right? So the Bears had just got done playing the Cowboys at Soldier Field, and what had happened is I wrote an article for the next morning talking, and Taylor Gabriel didn't play in that game, right? And so I wrote an article regarding how just the Bears offense was better without Taylor Gabriel. And so then the next night, it was a Friday night, some way, somehow my article made it into the Bears locker room. And then Taylor Gabriel actually DM'd me on Instagram and was like, hey, everyone keeps sending me your article. And I'm like, wait, which one? What do you mean? Because I've written like 2 or 3 pieces. And he's like, oh, do you really think the offense is better without me? So obviously on a fan level, I was like, yeah, the offense is better without you, right? But then on a as like a media guy, I was like, let me phrase it this way, like, you have a job to do, you have your own bills to pay, right? I have a job to do, I have my own bills to pay. So this is my way of doing my job. You're doing your job. And then, he kind of understood, but then he also went ahead and, and I'm like, hey, like, because I know the Bears were playing Green Bay the following week, right? And I was like, hey, hopefully you're back out there against Green Bay. And then he kind of turned it into a thing of like, oh yeah, it's not even Mitch is everything, and Mitch does everything for the offense, referring to Trubisky and stuff. So yeah, that was a super interesting story that I had. But usually with players, right, like especially in Chicago, because the locker room they built, they really don't seem to mind if you like write anything about them, because they understand like where you're coming from and the job that you have to do.
Yeah.
We'll see if he gets picked up in this free agency buzz. I mean, I know he's a free agent now, so we'll see.
G, you got anything else? I got one more question.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I know that you report a lot. Do you get to play fantasy football at all?
I actually do play fantasy football. And I'm in a couple different leagues. So every single year, my league average, well, I've let's see, I'm in 14 different leagues, believe it or not, right? Just
love it.
Yeah, that's just how much I am into football, right? Because the game's, my life 24/7. But typically what happens is like I have a work league, composed of just people from work. Then I have like a couple Twitter friends, Bears group chat guys, I'm in a league with them. And then there's a couple like charity leagues that I do every single year with 360 Fantasy Football, where, we have like 10 people. And then what happens with the 10 people is everyone pitches in $20, and then the total is 200. There's no like winner. The $200 goes to charity. And then I'm in a couple dynasty leagues as well, just like with other friends. And then obviously I get requests for like redraft leagues every year and stuff. And for me, it's just like, all right, let's go the more the merrier. So it's like this past season for fantasy, my record ranged from like 1-13 to like 13-1. So I was kind of like all across the board. But yeah, I'm super into fantasy. One of my best friends, big Patriots fan, me and him used to write together at one website. He's studying sports journalism at Arizona State right now. So like, I compete, I'm playing his leagues every year, and it's just like super competitive overall. And I really like the atmosphere surrounding fantasy football, because it's like anything can happen any given week.
Yeah.
You might need to bring your friend on here soon with all the Patriots signing this right. Go Sun Devils. But yeah, man, that's awesome.
How do you manage all those leagues? Do you use something like Fantasy Pros or something that kind of links them all together where you can look at them at once? Or are you going from Yahoo to ESPN to whatever, Sleeper, and managing all your lineups that way?
Yeah, so I do more the Yahoo to ESPN to like Sleeper type thing, where it's just like, okay, let's just say I've got like 4 leagues on Yahoo. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and set the lineup for those 4 first on Thursday morning, right? And then Sunday morning, and then I do the same for ESPN and the same for Sleeper and some of the other apps. And then what I do is I go back, so I do that Thursday morning, which usually takes like 10 minutes. And then I go back and on Sunday morning, I'll just go ahead and double check everything. And my whole thing is, all right, once it's locked in by like Sunday morning at 9 or 10 in the morning, like I'm not going to go ahead and change it, just because that's also part of the fun with fantasy, is just continuously being able to, stick to your lineup.
There you go. Are you biased when it comes to fantasy at all?
I'm actually not biased when it comes to fantasy. I feel like my whole strategy is this: is I'm trying to get like playmakers in the first 4 to 5 rounds. And then obviously, you have other positions like tight end that you try to hit on in the later rounds. And then there's always going to be someone every single year that ends up ruining your plans at the quarterback position. So for me, what I like to do is once like the 8th or 9th round comes around, those are the 2, 8, 9, 10th, 11th round. Like that's when I double down and just take 2 quarterbacks back to back that have different bye weeks. Because my whole thing is this: it's like, okay, if I can get like a Russell Wilson in one round, let's say, and then next round, someone serviceable is there. I don't know, like Alex Smith, for example, if Alex Smith is starting, or a guy like, Baker Mayfield's available, or like Cam Newton, for example, I'm only taking the second quarterback really because I need him for like just the 1 week that like my QB1 is out. Right. So like, that's what I try and do. And then just the way I build the rest of my rosters, finding a balance between like, top tier contributors, but then also like good depth guys that nobody's really talking about. And then, you just hope that those like good depth guys are able to like really compensate and pay off and just throughout the course of the season. So like an example of that this year's like, or in 2020 was like David Montgomery, injuries is like before like training camp, then everyone's freaking out because everyone's like, oh my God, he's going to be out for like the next couple of weeks. And then week 1 rolls around, he's starting. And then leading up to the fantasy draft, I'm seeing Montgomery sitting there in like the 5th, 6th round. And then all of a sudden it's like, he's one of the most consistent guys in PPR. Right. And so as a result of that, like naturally, those are like the types of steals you look for. And I do this every single year. Also, another thing is I will end up, so like one of my friends will be like on the board next or on the clock next, and then I'll be picking ahead of him. And then I always snag one of their top tier targets. And the way I do that is because they'll drop little tidbits and stuff like in our group chats of, oh, this is who like you need to go after in fantasy. And then I'm taking all these notes down and stuff because I'm like, all right, well, I need to one up every single one of these guys. And then they naturally just end up like getting pissed off at me when I strike the, when I pull the trigger on a guy 1 pick before them, because I know at that point, if that player's still on the board, they're going to go after him that very next pick.
Love it.
I like that. It's like kind of still in a way. Go ahead, Duran. You said he had one more question.
I think the fantasy football overshadowed it because I love fantasy football. But what do you think? What's the best part about like going to training camp? Have you been to a training camp? Do you get to see the players more up close and personal?
Yeah, so I've been to training camp. I didn't go back in 2020, but 2019 was an awesome experience with the media pass and stuff. You're getting to, again, just interview guys, create some sort of small talk with them. And that's just the cool thing about the Bears fan base is that training camp's the one place every single year where I meet a lot of other, Bears podcasters, content creators, just even general fans that have DM'd me on Twitter. So it's kind of like a whole big like family get together is the way I would describe it. And then obviously, having the media pass, you do get to go like behind the scenes and stuff. I mean, granted, the Bears don't do this anymore, but they used to have a section during training camp where you could sit in the cafeteria as a media member and then eat with the players, just talk to them and stuff. Sweet. They don't do that anymore, though. I don't know why. But also, just doing this stuff in general, I have like 19, 20, 21 hour days sometimes, but I really like the entire grind.
I bet, man. Do you have like a favorite player that you like to interview or like converse with? Is it Tyler Gabriel?
It's actually not it's not Taylor Gabriel, right? I would say my first ever interview was Bilal Nichols, the defensive lineman back in 2019, right? And I think you talk to anyone that actually covers like any team across the NFL, they'll tell you, hey, your first interview will always be the most special one. Like your first one-on-one interview with the player is always going to be the one that's the most special, just because like that is really a major stepping stone into just the sort of the kind of career that like you've taken, right? So like Bilal Nichols was my first one. Duke Shelley was my second one. I had Riley Ridley was my third one. There was a day I was supposed to interview David Montgomery, but like that didn't happen because he had his family over at training camp. But those first couple of interviews are always the ones that like hold a special place in your heart. So I don't necessarily have a favorite one, but if I had to pick, it would probably be the first couple ones that I did.
Yep,
that's awesome.
Those are important. Well, we're talking about players. You ready to move on, G?
Yeah, let's do it for sure.
So we want to guess your favorite Bears player of all time. G, I'm going to let you have the first shot.
All right, I'm going to go with my high school. They were Lobos, so I'm going to go with another Lobo. I'm going to go with Brian Urlacher.
Brian Urlacher. I'm going with Matt Forte. I love Matt Forte's game.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so Urlacher's actually my favorite Bears player, just of all time, because again, like here's the thing, right? I've had debates with people about this heavily on like social media and stuff, and they tell me they're like, oh, well, these guys like Luke Kuechly, well, Kuechly's not in the league anymore, but like these guys like Luke Kuechly and Bobby Wagner and, Roquan Smith and Fred Wagner, that they're all on the level of like guys like Brian Urlacher and, Ray Lewis. And I tell them, I'm like, no, there's no way in hell that any of these other guys that I just mentioned that played in like the 2010s are currently playing are on the level of like Urlacher or Ray Lewis or any of the guys that came before them. I mean, Lewis and Urlacher like revolutionized the position. And growing up here in Chicago, like you have a rich history and tradition of linebackers. So like for me as a kid, Brian Urlacher is the first person I fell in love with. Matt Forte was honestly my second favorite player. And then obviously there's other ones too, like really like Devin Hester, Charles Tillman, even Lance Briggs, Julius Peppers was the Bears for a couple of years as well. And then just in terms of today as a fan, my favorite players, really like David Montgomery, Khalil Mack, obviously, Akeem Hicks, Roquan Smith. So all these it's a whole bunch of guys that I just think from different generations of like NFL talent and stuff, they've been my favorite. But if I have to rank my top two that I've personally seen play, it would be Urlacher and Forte.
Love it. Let's talk about Brian Urlacher just a little bit. I mean, we could talk about him all day, but Hall of Famer, 8-time Pro Bowler, Rookie of the Year, and Defensive Player of the Year. I love that you brought up like the back in the day, the linebackers from back in the day and the linebackers today. Brian Urlacher is one of those guys that I feel like could still play in the game the way it is today. I mean, I love Ray Lewis, especially through his time at the Ravens and stuff, but he's one of those guys that I feel like if he was thrown in the NFL today, he would struggle a little bit. Just because, especially middle linebacker, you need so much coverage. And, Brian Urlacher was that guy. He's a converted safety, and he played that Tampa 2 middle linebacker like better than anyone that I could think of just playing that. I mean, do you agree with that he could still play in this passing league today?
I think, yeah, he could, because he was one of the like best cover linebackers throughout his time, right? And then you've had quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers, and I'll just use Rodgers because again, they played each other twice a year for like 7-8 years, but Aaron Rodgers was like, hey, Brian Urlacher's like the best quarterback that the best linebacker that like I've ever faced as a quarterback, or just like the best competitor in general. And that quote right there really speaks volumes to me, because anytime you have one guy that's going to be in Canton saying that about another guy that's going to be in Canton, or is already in Canton, that just really speaks volumes to just the competitive nature, but also the respect that both guys had for each other, and so that Rodgers quote like really sticks out to me. And I know Rodgers, when Urlacher made the Hall of Fame in 2018, right? Rodgers kind of wished him like, Brian, congrats and stuff, and congrats on a great career, things of that nature. So that those things right there, really speak volumes. So, and I think if Urlacher was still in the NFL today, he could still be very solid. Because, he burst onto the scene as a rookie in 2000, like week 4 or week 5, and then just like never looked back since then.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
As we said, Rookie of the Year. And the same thing, Jason Taylor, I know, got a big boost to get into the Hall of Fame because Tom Brady wrote a letter to the Hall of Fame members saying, listen, I played against Miami twice a year, and this guy deserves to be in the Hall of Famer. So I know that spoke volumes.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Do you got anything on Brian Urlacher?
No, I just like you guys were saying, man, he was a force in the middle. He was crazy. I mean, one play that sticks out definitely is, I think it was they're going for 3 and they faked it and he scored the touchdown, and like everyone just went crazy.
Going for 2?
No, they're going for 3. Field goal.
Oh, going for a field goal.
No, they're going for field goal. Then they always brought in Brian Urlacher for special teams, and he just slipped through and caught that. Then I think that kind of sparked like the linebackers lining up there. Like, I know Vrabel caught a couple for New England, but I think Brian Urlacher was one of the few guys with the trick plays, and that's something that I love.
I don't remember that at all. I didn't know he caught any conversions. The one thing that stands out to me, I just watched it. There's a compilation on YouTube. He had a 26 tackle game against Arizona. I mean, I feel like 15 of them were against Edgerrin James, but do you have a Brian Urlacher one memory that kind of stands out to you?
Honestly, memory is a good one. I don't have like one set memory. Actually, you know what? There is one. So this was the 2007 season, and the Bears finished 7-9 that year, but Green Bay was playing Chicago here in Chicago late in the season, and then Urlacher picked off Brett Favre for returned the interception, like I think 51 or 61 yards for a touchdown. and the Bears won that game that day on like a cloudy December day, 35-7. So that was always just like one of my favorite moments. But then other ones have just been like times where you just see the camera on him and he's just like, he would be like lined up in the middle of the field on like, again, prime time, so like Sunday, Monday, or Thursday night football, just like ready to go ahead. And then usually, something super special would happen. So, but I would say definitely the Favre Urlacher interception is probably my favorite memory of him.
Yeah. And watching his highlights just recently, the guy picked off Favre. He picked off and Aaron Rodgers. So I imagine, not many people could say that. I picked off Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers throughout my career. If Brian Urlacher was Batman, do you know who his Robin would be? Who was his sidekick?
It's got to be Briggs.
Yeah, it would definitely be Lance Briggs, because I know, Briggs's career with the Bears was interesting because, like, had a really solid career, and the Bears were the only team that he ever played for. But then there was also a point where there was some turmoil towards the middle part of Briggs's career, just in terms of, hey, if you're not going to like pay me, then just go ahead and trade me, And I know there was a point where the Bears were like fielding offers with the now Washington football team for Lance Briggs, right? But the reality of the situation is, you knew when 54 and 55 were lined up that opposing offenses really weren't going to be able to do much. But yeah, and Briggs was always like a great number 2 and just compliments of Brian Urlacher overall.
Yeah, the best linebacker duo ever. They're up there.
I think if both of them get to Canton, then or if Briggs gets to Canton, right?
Yeah.
Then you can talk about it being one of the most underrated, or one of the best like linebacker duos ever. But if Briggs doesn't make it, I'm not so sure. Now, personally, I think when we talk to people today, right, one of the things they'll tell me is like guys like Charles Tillman and Lance Briggs are not like Hall of Famers. But I think what people also forget to factor out is that, and people just don't take into account, is that what a Hall of Famer is in 2021 is vastly different from whatever a Hall of Famer was, 15, 16, 17 years ago, when these guys were, in fact, one of the top, at their positions in the game, right? So, like, the definition of what is a Hall of Famer has completely changed. I mean, it's no different than, like, the whole, Patrick Mahomes is the GOAT talk. I mean, when people tell me, like, Patrick Mahomes is the GOAT, I'm like, no, it's disrespectful to Tom Brady, because he's been there, done it 7 times now, And then also, I know I've had, like, major beat writers or major writers just for big outlets have kind of compared Mahomes to, like, Michael Jordan, and it's just like, no, Mahomes is not even a Michael Jordan either. Like, quit that talk, because like I'm a Bulls fan as well, and I'm not just saying it to be a Bulls fan, but like Mahomes has not impacted the NFL the way that like Jordan impacted the NBA, or the, the literal standard that like Tom Brady set for quarterbacks was just like winning year in and year out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know Tom Brady's got his best friend back to do. One thing I remember about Lance Briggs is back in 2008, I think the 49ers actually got in trouble for tampering with that. Like you said, he said, pay me or trade me. And I know that the Niners made a call like within like the league standards. And then I think they had to sacrifice like a 5th round draft pick for that. But I remember at one point, Lance Briggs said, I want to play for the 49ers because, they're calling, and that's what got us in trouble.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting scenario, because for Briggs at the time, it was more so just like he was kind of super frustrated with where the Bears were at, in terms of contract negotiations and stuff, and how far apart the two sides were. And it's ultimately for him, the best thing to do was just be like, hey, listen, if you're not going to like pay me, and my agent's telling me that like these other teams are going to go ahead and not only trade for me, but then also go ahead and pay me, then let's just go ahead and get something done. Because there are times in this league, where we see it's just best for like both sides to move on. And when that happens, for fans, it's a super unfortunate ending, because like no one wants to see that happen. But then at the end of the day, you realize like there's just certain moves that are made that are just best for not only the organization, but also the players. So essentially for both sides.
There you go.
I did want to hit on Matt Forte. Just a couple of things. I was watching him just this week. 8-year Bear, 2-time Pro Bowler. I actually thought he made the Pro Bowl more times than that, just based off his pass catching and the way he played alone. But the surprising thing to me, Matt Forte is number 2 in Bears history in rushing yards, receptions, and reception yards. And that's all behind Walter Payton. Walter Payton had more receptions and reception yards than him, which I thought he would for sure be the number 1 running back, at least with that. And that really surprised me. Do you know anything? Do you have anything to touch on with that, with Walter Payton catching the ball as before our time? I know that.
Yeah, so Walter Payton was interesting, right? Because like, when you watch the ESPN 30 for 30 Bears documentary, you realize that Jim McMahon, the quarterback at that time, kind of talked about how, the Bears wanted to be such a run first offense in front of because Mike Ditka wanted that. And then there was a point where Walter Payton, Jim McMahon started throwing the ball, and Walter Payton literally told Jim McMahon, like, yo, whatever the hell you're doing, you keep doing it, because like I don't want to consistently get the ball and keep having to like get killed. So Peyton was honestly like hard runner. To this day, there's times I'll go back and I'll pull his highlights up, just because there's a certain level of appreciation that you have for someone that, although you may not have seen play, you still appreciate that specific player poured their heart and soul into this specific franchise or your specific franchise and kind of what it means. And then just touching on Forte, it's interesting because during the 2019 season, or the Bears, prior to the start of the 2019 season, this was June, the Bears had their, 100th year convention to kind of celebrate the 100th season of the franchise. And he was asked an interesting question. He's like, oh, what do you think of like the new style of running back that like pass catches and then is also able to like be a hard runner and run out of the backfield, And he gave an interesting answer. He's just like, look, these guys like, Alvin Kamara and like Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott,
Christian McCaffrey.
McCaffrey, even, Saquon Barkley. Like the fact that these guys are all doing it is great, but let's be real about something. Like I was one of the first ones to do it. And then you go back and you look at the numbers and you're like, yeah, Forte was ahead of his time. Even LaDainian Tomlinson, you could argue, was ahead of his time in that sense too, right? So, and that's just one thing with the Bears franchise is they've always had players that have been ahead of the game in different eras, but then the NFL is just like the NFL for whatever reason, although the Bears haven't been winning a lot over the last decade or so, the NFL is always, like the Bears have always been one of the few teams that's like consistently been ahead of the game in terms of like modern NFL stuff, because they may not have like a super modern scheme, but they have like modern players. It's just the franchise can't put it all together.
Yeah, I definitely like what you said about, Matt Forte for sure. I think that answer pretty much killed it. I love that. I hate to be biased, but Roger Craig was the first running back to go 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. So I totally agree with him. It's like, let's be real, these guys aren't, real, the first guys to do it. Roger Craig was, then came Marshall Faulk, then came, these running backs nowadays, when I think just the rest of the NFL evolved, maybe not necessarily around the running backs, but a lot more focus when it came to it. Maybe it's because fantasy became a little bit more a thing or whatnot, but it was definitely fun to see Forte. One thing I have to say about him was just being consistent. That's something that he always was. And I hated seeing him in that Jets. I think a lot of players do that towards the end of the career. They want to play one more year, so they play in another team. So I remember him going to the Jets and I hated it, but I always had love for him and, that two-lane great for sure.
I just looking back at Walter Payton's footage, you always see him running the ball. When I think of Matt Forte, I think of his screen game. I think he is probably one of the best screen guys ever. I know you mentioned Marshall Faulk. Marshall Faulk pretty much patented that Texas route, the little angle route right over the middle. And when I think of Matt Forte, I think of that screen game. I think he was the king of the screen. And it's just weird to me. I never really saw Walter Payton catching the ball. So when I looked at those stats, I saw he had more catches and more yards than Matt Forte. I was very surprised. But yeah, shout out Marshall Faulk, of course, all the guys before him, Roger Craig.
Yeah, and I just think that it's not even exclusive to like running back or linebacker, like because those are just two positions that we've discussed. But I feel like just one of the big things is that like as time's gone on, especially for a lot of younger fans, they've really forgotten just that there were other guys that came way
Mm-hmm.
before our time and your time, that like accomplished so many great things. And I think, one of the reasons that like people or just younger fans, especially today, tend to forget is it's just like the advent of social media. So like you have, a lot of players and stuff, and they're posting like their personal life on social media. And to these guys, like, okay, it's super cool. But like growing up, there really wasn't like a way for us to see, Brian Urlacher's like Snapchat story or like Ray
Yeah.
Lewis's Snapchat story, things of that nature,
Yeah.
But definitely, I just think a lot of the younger fans today, they don't necessarily have like that full on appreciation
Mm-hmm.
for certain players, because like one of my best friends, or two of my best friends actually, they're Giants fans, right? And like I hear people today be like, oh, well, Aaron Donald's the greatest defensive player ever, and I'm like, are we sure about that? Like, let's go back and kind of let's watch Lawrence Taylor and look at the impact that he had on the game,
Oof.
or
Reggie White.
What a name.
yeah, a guy like Reggie White, for example, even Jason Taylor, I would throw into that mix as well.
Deion Sanders.
I think, like you said, these young fans need to take notes actually from you. And like you said, you went back and you watched Walter Payton just to appreciate, what, the involvement has become. And I think a lot of people should definitely do that. I mean, I know I did. I mean, going back, I went back and watched, Marcus Allen, and seeing that guy run, it's just like his stride looked the exact same, but he's outrunning everybody. So that was something really good to see. And, I see that in some running backs nowadays. Like I see that in Christian McCaffrey, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, his legs are moving, but they all look like it's the same pace, but he just that separation is key. So going back and respecting the past, respecting the history, not only for your team's history, but the NFL as a whole, like you did with Lawrence Taylor, throwing his name out there for sure. I wasn't alive to see that, but hearing, stories, from my auntie's boyfriend about Lawrence Taylor, like I feel like I'm there, man, because the passion that he has for sure. So, you got to respect the history, like you were saying.
Yeah. Last thing about players that I have to say, I know we already mentioned Peanut Tillman, and he's one of those guys we've mentioned. It's like he probably won't even get into the Hall of Fame, but he had the most forced fumbles, most pass deflections, number 3 in interceptions in Bears history. And a guy that can get that many turnovers for your team is a complete game changer. And, he might have been the most valuable defensive player on that side just because he got the ball that many times. And, guys like that, a lot of guys are going to get forgotten throughout history, but
you still hear announcers today calling it the peanut punch. The announcers today just say like, oh, and he nailed that peanut punch. I was like, damn, that's crazy. That's still being, out there. I remember watching this guy at 33 out there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, the thing is, Peanut Tillman was the one guy who legitimately went ahead and like revolutionized the cornerback position in the NFL, because traditionally with cornerbacks, what it was is they were just going to be used to obviously go ahead and line up against opposing running backs or wide receivers. And then all of a sudden you have Peanut Punch coming in, who is just like, and Peanut Tillman just comes in with the peanut punch and is like, okay, you know what? As a cornerback, I can do a hell of a lot more for your team. And I mean, way freaking more than just to the defense in general, than just lining up and covering some guy. So like when people talk to me about like shut down cornerbacks today and stuff, and I'm like, look, I respect, these guys like Richard Sherman or like Darrelle Revis even, but like if you want to talk about like the real OG corner, the guy that was responsible for cornerbacks legitimately like having a name, you got to go back and you got to look at Peanut Tillman, because he really revolutionized just what cornerbacks meant to defenses, throughout the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing a interview actually with Humphrey after he was forcing some, turnovers. He goes, I went back and watched, Peanut Tillman and watched how receivers hold the ball. So like I got to study how they held the ball and I'd punch it out, and he gave shout out to Tillman. And that brings me to my next point as far as, him being underappreciated. And I want to ask you, do you feel like he's the most underappreciated Bear of all time, or do you have somebody else in mind?
Underappreciated Bear, I would say amongst the Bears fan base, not really, because again, like, with any fan base, what's going to happen is you do have a number of guys that like 31 NFL fan bases may not necessarily have like a diehard respect for. Yeah, they may acknowledge that like, okay, this player plays for this team and he's solid, but they don't know what certain players mean to certain cities and certain teams. But I wouldn't say Peanut Tillman was underappreciated. If anything, I would say that the most underappreciated Bear is probably Devin Hester in my eyes, because a lot of people, like Bears fans love Devin Hester,
Yeah.
But like for a lot of people, I mean, they just kind of saw like Devin Hester as just being like this kick returner. And, the Bears, they tried to use him as a wide receiver some years. Obviously, that didn't work out. His main thing was being a kick returner. But like you talk to, former players and just guys that did play with Devin Hester, and they will straight up tell you, hey, listen, if we were on defense, right, we would the coaches would be yelling at us and say, all right, get back onto the sidelines. We need to go ahead and we need to make the adjustments and talk about the series that just happened and get ready for the next series. But then a lot of those players would take their time, like getting back to the bench, simply because they knew that every time you kick the ball back there to number 23, something special is going to happen. And I think that anytime you have a player that everyone wants to watch, just specifically for what he's able to do, that really speaks volumes as to the level of talent, the impact that the player has, as well as the amount of respect that player garnered, not just from people on his team, but just from people around the league.
Yeah.
The greatest returner of all time.
Yeah, I think the Colts learned the hard way in the Super Bowl.
He opened up the Super Bowl with the kick return, but he owns over 10 NFL records. I know a lot of them have to do with special teams, but to me, a lot of those records will never be broken, especially the way the return game is played today. They're pretty much trying to take it out of the game, where it's literally like 90% of kickoffs are touchbacks. And, if you look at that return that Devin Hester did in the Super Bowl, he was catching the ball at like the 10-yard line. It's like a 93-yard return or something like that. It's like, nowadays the kicks are going right through the back of the end zone. So I think a lot of those records are pretty safe nowadays. But Devin Hester, one of the greatest of all time, especially doing that.
Yeah, one thing I do like about that Super Bowl too, I think both players that scored the first touchdowns on each team, Reggie Wayne and Hester, were representatives of that U. So I mean, there's a lot of respect there. I know you talked about Jordan, and instantly I thought of like the Bad Boys Pistons and how like he beefed up, and like you said, he revolutionized the game. And I think Devin Hester definitely revolutionized that return game for sure.
Of course.
Let's
move on. Oh, go ahead.
I'd say Hester definitely did, because kind of what had happened as a result of him was, if you were a kicker or a punter, and you were just a special teams coordinator in general, you really had to not only game plan hard for Devin Hester, but anytime you had a speedy returner back there, because like Josh Cribbs was another guy, right? That was just super dangerous. You kind of had to go ahead and think 2 or 3 times about, do I really want to kick it back there? Or because I'm playing this guy this week, how am I going to go about special teams? So the fact that like teams were literally having to change their game plans up each week specifically for a special teams guy, that is something that you do not see very often, because we see it for like offensive and defensive players, but very rarely do we see it for special teams guys.
Dante Hall, another guy, Kansas City. He was killing it back then. I mean, that was when guys got the chance to be special teams. Steve Smith got his start doing special team shit. So it just shows how many guys just don't get the chance that they used to have back in the day.
I know a lot of people are scared of like Cordell Patterson nowadays.
It's it's different.
No, it's way different, but I'm saying like people are like, oh man, you got some electrifying moves in this man. So it's something fun to see for sure. All right, so let's move on.
Go ahead. We want to know your favorite Bears coach of all time.
Yes.
I mean, just running down the list, you guys have Dick Duron, Levy Smith, Mark Trestman, John Fox, Bill Nagy, the new guy. I mean, back in the day, Ditka.
Ditka.
I think I know the answer, but who do you got here?
So favorite coach would obviously for me just be Lovie Smith, right?
Of course.
And I picked Lovie Smith because again, he's one of the few like African American and minority head coaches for
Mhm.
the Bears. But ultimately, you look at Lovie Smith, and I just felt like for him, he was one of those coaches that was always underappreciated, just in the sense that his defenses and just his teams in general, regardless of who was the quarterback, right? They
Mhm.
always put on a respectable showing, right? And it's like, what more could you ask for? It's just like for a lot of fans today, the team with a certain coach that will win like whatever 6, 7, 8 games, they'll just like, all right, they'll be like, yo, fire this guy. And then you do have guys, Lovie Smith, won like whatever 7, 8 games some years. They went
Mhm.
5-11 some years. But always put on a respectable showing. And to me, he kind of really embodied what Bears football was all about, which was just, toughness, persistence, grit, showing up and playing every single day, regardless of whatever the circumstances were, who was up and who was down. So
Mhm.
Lovey, yeah, I get he made the playoffs 3 times in 9 years, but one of those was a Super Bowl appearance. And like, let's be honest, how many coaches can say, oh, I had a run to the Super Bowl? There's only two that can stay it every single year.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
he did get fired after a 10-6 season.
Yeah.
And then you guys had Tressman, John Fox after that. Do you kind of feel like they let him go a little bit too early? I know he couldn't get over that playoff hump initially, but
Yeah, so there's actually a funny backstory with the whole Lovie Smith firing and then hiring Mark Trestman, right? So kind of what had happened is this, right? Is that year the Bears fired Smith in January 2013, and then they hired Trestman, right? But before they officially announced the Trestman hiring, what had happened is there were 3 candidates on their list. It was Bruce Arians, who was number 1. It was Darrell Bevel, who was number 2, and then Mark Trestman was number 3. And so Phil Emery, the general manager, went ahead and went with Trestman. But what had happened is this was at the same time, Bruce Arians was staying at a hotel in Lake Forest, Illinois, which is where about a mile away from the Bears facility. And he kind of was expecting to go ahead and get the phone call and then become the Bears head coach. And so that's one thing that a lot of people don't like seem to understand is that that's a really bad decision that Chicago's like still paying for even to this day. Because then Arians got the job in Arizona, and Arians did a really solid job in Arizona. It's just like the one year that they were gonna for sure make a Super Bowl run. Like Carson Palmer got hurt with the ACL injury, and then a couple of years later he ends up retiring, takes a year off, and then he's back. So the Bears hiring Trestman over Arians was definitely a terrible move. But then hiring or firing Lovie Smith after a 10-win season was also kind of a questionable move because that year was kind of they needed to rely. I think it was on Minnesota to beat Green Bay for the Bears to sneak into the playoffs, which obviously didn't happen.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
He's
see
back in
that.
the league now, isn't he? Isn't he the assistant head coach over with the Texans now, right?
Yeah, he is. So I'm excited because I'm excited to see Lovie Smith back in the league just because I think for the last couple of years he was actually here coaching at the University of Illinois.
Yeah.
And just in general, the thing is Illinois obviously is not a very good football program. One, because they don't invest in their facilities and stuff, and they don't invest in the football team.
Good
But also
basketball.
2, yeah, they invest in basketball. But number 2, right? Just the boosters at Illinois are incredibly stubborn, want results right away. And to build a college program is very different from building building up an NFL team. Where with the NFL, you have whatever. You can take 3-4 years, have 3-4 really good drafts, and now you have a team, right? But in college, when you have such a high turnover and you have players, cycling in and out and stuff, you really have to hit on multiple years worth of recruiting classes to be able to even have a solid foundation. And just Lovey was not extended the patience that he should have been extended at University of Illinois.
Yeah. I always look at coaches' draft history and Lovie Smith. I mean, I don't want to call him a bad drafter, but he had some bad classes. He had one All-Pro, which was Devin Hester, which is kind of a cheat because it was for special team stuff. In 9 years, I don't know who the GM was at that time, but was he in? Do you know if he was in charge of the personnel at that point, or if that was someone else kind of making the picks above him?
So it was more so the GM at the time was Jerry Angelo, right? Who they fired, I
Okay.
believe, in 2011 and hired Phil Emery. So Emery and Lovie Smith worked together for about 2 years. But the reality of the situation is just that it was more so Jerry Angelo pulling the trigger
Okay.
on these guys.
Yep.
Lovie Smith, I thought, did a really solid job because his expertise in the background was always defense. So he did a really solid job just finding, those late round guys, those undrafted guys that ended up becoming some core players for the Bears. So you look at guys like, Alex Brown, Israel Adonijah, Henry Melton's another one who I know played for the Cowboys for about a year, but Henry Melton was solid with the Bears. Corey Wooten's another guy. I believe Wooten went to Northwestern, had like a 7-sack season in 2010. So some of these guys, yeah, they were 1-year wonders, but like, again, it just goes back to this is how many guys can say, oh, I actually had a chance to like play in the NFL. How many people can say I played in the NFL? But then more so, how many people can say, okay, you know what? I played in the NFL, but even though I didn't like win a Super Bowl or have a Hall of Fame career, this is still what I accomplished. And it's still noteworthy in my eyes because what these guys do every single day is not easy to do.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
if you think about just the math, if there's 32 teams, literally like 3% of players win a Super Bowl a year. It's not many people win Super Bowls throughout this game. And so when you see a guy like Tom Brady, that makes it ridiculous.
Yeah.
G?
For sure. No, nothing on Lovey, man. I mean, nah, nothing at all, man.
All right.
Best of luck to him. He's actually the defensive coordinator too out there in Houston Tech and with the Texans. So, I mean, excited to see that defense, man. I know that that's his background for sure. So I'm excited to see how that goes. I know they just traded McKinney, but they got Shaq Lawson. So we'll see.
Good luck out there. It's not looking too bright.
Damn it, Easter B.
Yeah, but we'll see. Do you have a least favorite coach of all time for Bears history?
Least favorite coach would obviously be Mark Trestman. And the
Yeah.
reason I say Mark Trestman is because, like, yeah, the Bears had, the number 2, like, scoring offense in his first season. And they started off 3-0, and things seemed to be going real well with Cutler. But then also you look at the 2014 season, and you look at the 55-14 trouncing on national television against Green Bay. You look at the, trouncing that happened at the hands of the Patriots back in 2014 as well. So, and then on top of that, later on in the year, you had Jay Cutler get benched. You had, Aaron Cromer, Trustman's offensive coordinator, publicly throw Cutler under the bus, which even Aaron Rodgers came out and was just like, dude, that's absolutely wrong for you to go ahead and do. And so Trestman would honestly be my least favorite because he was just the way I describe him, he was just way too much of a control freak and never really a guy that I thought would be, head coaching material in the NFL. I mean, when they hired him, I was like, all right, you're going in a different direction, but can he really be someone that is going to have lasting success in this league? Probably not, and that's the reason I just feel like teams today, as a result of seeing guys like Mark Trestman, this is why they don't dip into like the Canadian Football League as much. Because, like, let's be real, this is a copycat league. And if a team sees, a Canadian football head coach panning out, other teams and front offices and ownership groups are going to kind of go ahead and try to take that very similar, like, step forward in terms of maybe can we copy and replicate and have the success that, like, this other team did.
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead, G.
It's just going to be a stupid comment, but he looked like a weirdo. Remember at his press conference, he had his hair split down the side and he had those, bifocals on. I don't know, man. I just, like you said, he came from the Canadian Football League too, which is kind of surprising. I know he spent some time at NC State and also was like a quarterbacks and offensive quality control coach for the NFL. I know he spent some time with the Niners, Raiders out here, but yeah, I mean, I was really curious of like you went from Lovie Smith to Trust. I was like, I don't know, it just went weird. It was just weird for me. Like he just looked like a weirdo. I was like, who is this geek? Like,
Yeah, he was there for 2 years. His first year was decent, but I mean, a lot of those guys were probably Lovie Smith and the GM that you mentioned. I forget his name already, but they're players. And then he sort of faded out. He was like the QB whisperer type guy. And I know Cutler was there at the time, and we all know Cutler had his ups and his downs, and they were trying to get a guy specifically for Cutler probably in there, but it just didn't work out. It didn't work out for Mr. Mark Trestman. One guy that I thought you might mention was John Fox, and his record was horrible. I don't know if he was just put in a bad position, but he was 14-34 throughout his stay there, and that's the worst winning percentage in Bears history.
Yeah, so Fox was interesting, right? Because with him, what it was is that he gets, I mean, him and Denver, they mutually part ways after Denver just could not get over the hump. And then the very next year, Denver goes, they hire Gary Kubiak, and then they go ahead and they win the Super Bowl. But Fox was certainly interesting because when you look at him, I don't think that he was ever he was never as bad as, fans and just media made him out to be, because he was entering a situation where you take the job in Chicago and you realize it is going to be a multi-year rebuild, right? Because the Bears had, I mean, what, two building blocks at the time, and Alshon Jeffrey and Kyle Long. That's about it, right? So Fox was, not necessarily given a fair shake, but he also understood the nature of the business in the sense that and any coach is going to tell you it's the nature of the business, right? It's not only specific to Fox. So Fox understood that if I don't win, I'm going to be out. But then also you look at the Bears, you see the Bears defense today, and you've seen it the last couple of years. A lot of that is because of Vic Fangio and John Fox. I mean, listen, these guys, the Bears won 5 games in 2017, but they were a top 10 defense, right? They won 3 games in 2013 or in 2016 actually, and they were rated like the 15th or 16th best defense in the league. And so my question always goes back to this, and I consistently tell people, hey, listen, how many teams can you say that won 3 games but had a defense that was ranked in the top half of the league? How many teams can you say that won 5 games, were rebuilding, but had a defense that was ranked 10th in the league? And it's just a major misconception for a lot of Bears fans and just people in general. What is that, oh, well, the Bears defense got to work out because they traded for Cleo Mack, and they acquired Roquan Smith in the same offseason. Those guys were the finishing touches on this defense, and what you see today, or what you've seen over the last couple of years under Matt Nagy. But really, at the end of the day, right, it was Fox and, Fangio, the work that they put in to acquire guys like Danny Trevathan and Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, even, a guy like Eddie Jackson, for example, revitalizing Kyle Fuller. Those were the guys that have all become core pieces of the Bears defense that were acquired under Fangio and Fox. So Fox was never as bad as certain players or certain people made him out to be. He was just never the best either. And I think it's always unwise to expect a head coach to like absolutely do everything perfectly.
Yeah, that's a great answer, man. That was very enlightening for me.
Yep. Let's move on a little bit. We want to know your earliest Bears memory. You might have mentioned it a little bit earlier with the Bears and Packers games, but were there any specific moments or players or anything that kind of stand out to you?
Specific moments or players. I would say more so just, so Alex Brown. So the Bears were playing the Packers. I believe this was 08 or 09 on Monday Night Football. And Alex Brown, the Bears ended up winning the game 2017. What has been, what was one of like the coldest games in NFL history. And the Bears need to win that game to stay in the playoffs. And so Alex Brown, defensive lineman for the Bears, he blocked one of Mason Crosby's like game-winning field goal attempts, and then as a result, the Bears ended up winning the game. So that was honestly one of my more favorite memories because, like, again, as Bears fans don't necessarily get to see January football very often. So when you do, it is really a super rare treat, and you try to enjoy every single moment of it. And so anything and everything that kind of builds up to playoff football, and even just having the Bears be in playoff contention, those are always like special moments. But that Alex Brown one really sticks out to me more than anyone, or a couple other ones that I may have mentioned.
A couple of the early things that I really remember. I don't know if you remember them. Of course, Chris Farley, SNL. We know that. Love the Bears stuff. But the number one thing that kind of stood out to me was I remember being young and Walter Payton like announcing his illness at that press conference. It was, he was of course emotional about it, but that was, I feel like, the very first time that I kind of realized who Walter Payton was, what Walter Payton was, and the Bears. I mean, being out in California, we didn't get to see many Bears games. So that was a big one. Do you remember that at all?
I do not actually. I mean, I know I went back and watched like the 30 for 30 on it, and it was looking back at it after all these years, and obviously I wasn't not present for Peyton to announce it, but it was definitely one of those moments where you look at for the 85 Bears, everyone talks about the defense and the personalities and Mike Singletary, Gary Fennick, a whole bunch of other guys. People talk about the kind of rift that existed between Jim McMahon and the head coach Mike Ditka at the time. And then you realize there was Walter Payton, who I really think when you go back and you talk about the 85 Bears, yeah, it's all centered around defense, but a lot of their success came because of Walter Payton, right? Because if you don't have a hard runner like that, like is the defense really getting all the rest that it's getting? So Walter meant a hell of a lot, and he still means a hell of a lot just to the city of Chicago in general for older and younger fans. The press conference was tragic. Obviously, the things that followed after that were super tragic. But I think it's just like anytime you have someone that means that much to a city, to a fan base, not just because of the sport, but just because of who they are in general as a player and as a person, the whole city will like rally behind that specific person.
Yeah. I feel like I probably remembered that the most because I'm a Cowboys fan. Emmitt Smith was on the brink of, chasing that record as well. So I was 10 years old. It was 1999 when that press conference happened. So
I want to say me and you were hanging out, actually. I think we're at your mom's.
So, I mean, that's probably why I remember it. But I'd say the first time that I actually remember the Bears as a whole watching the games was the Kyle Orton, Thomas Jones, Moose Muhammad, of course, on defense, Urlacher, Briggs, Tillman, and I got to name 2 Texas guys because we're Texas fans. Cedric Benson was on that team, and Nathan Vasher playing DB there. So those are my first real days of kind of remembering the Bears as watching football as a fan.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I got to touch on that too because my boy Sedge, for sure, rest in peace. And, you got, like you said before, I mean, Chris Farley, we're big Chris Farley fans. Again, rest in peace, man. Oh, not trying to bring everybody down. But, yeah, man, the Bears and Mike Ditka, all that going around for sure. But, it was definitely like seeing like you said, the old rivalry between the Bears and the Packers. Like it was just the battle of the gridiron, which is so awesome to see. And, you got Ditka on one side, coaching the hell out of his team, and he had the sweater vests and the big old blue blockers. That was something great to see. But that rivalry is like, I don't know, man. I'm still like it's in my head when you said it. When someone said like, "Oh, we can play the NFL without the Bears," like you can't, because that rivalry is always going to be there. That's one of the oldest rivalries in the game today. Of course. And like it's just something so great to see. And like those games are always going to be, hard fought on both teams because of the rivalries for sure. And yeah, man, it's I don't know, man. That's something that I always remember is just those, those classic games for sure.
Of course. Let's move on a little bit. We want to know your favorite memory being a Bears fan. I mean, you guys have been to a Super Bowl. You haven't won. But there are some great games leading up to that. It could be a classic game. It could be a game you attended, draft class, anything like that stand out to you?
Yeah, it could be Rex Grossman proving the odds wrong. I don't know.
Kevin White.
Yeah. Favorite game would probably be the 2018 NFC. So 2018, the Bears clinched the NFC North title at Soldier Field against the Packers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain level of like, to clinch a division title should be celebrated, right? But to do it at home again in front of your own home fans, I remember that year was interesting because the Bears were at a point where they could have lost to Green Bay, but then still went ahead to San Francisco the very next weekend and then clinched the division title, right? It was pretty much theirs at that point. But for a lot of people and a lot of people that do not live in Illinois, that are Bears fans, they, a lot of people agreed on one thing of like, hey, listen, it would be cool for me to go to San Francisco or Minnesota next week or the week after that and see the Bears clinch the NFC North title. But at the same time, it would also be really awesome to see them clinch it at home in front of the fans. There's a certain level of like satisfaction that you experience when you're able to clinch it in your own home stadium, knowing that when you're leaving the stadium, everyone is super fired up about it. That would honestly be like my favorite game as a Bears fan.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I could see that. I mean, Devin Hester kick return. I mean, that had to be a great moment. I know that wasn't a win in the Super Bowl, but two things that I did rewatch this just this week were the 2006 AFC Championship versus the Saints. You guys ended up dominating that one. It was 39-14. Reggie Bush was in his prime during that. He had the 80-yard touchdown. I think it was like 84-yard. The touchdown catch from Drew Brees. But actually, Drew Brees had a really bad game in that one. He had a fumble. He had multiple interceptions, and then he had a throwaway safety. He was in the end zone, and he did a throwaway with that one. But, shout out Cedric Benson. That was one of his better games in that one. I don't know if you remember that at all. That was 2006.
Yeah, I definitely remember that. I think that year, the Bears running game was such a big part of, obviously you had the really good defense, right? But then the really good running game was also such a key part of just that team's success to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great one. The second one that I watched same year, it was that damn Brian Urlacher 26 tackle game versus the Cardinals. You guys were actually down in that one 23-3, and you had a comeback to win it. But it's classic Bears of all their players. Devin Hester had a punt return for a touchdown. The Bears were undefeated at that time. They stayed undefeated and made their way to the Super Bowl that year. And then the result of that game was actually the Dennis Green famous rant of, they are who we thought they were, and crown them now and all that shit. So that, to me, that was classic Bears football for that one.
Yeah, it was it was classic Bears football, and obviously I remember that I remember that game as well, right? And I still go back and I still watch the reruns because the Bears heading into that game, they were 4-0, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a general feeling around the league that when the NFL is always better, right? When you have these classic franchises like the Bears, for example, that have been like cornerstones and will always be cornerstones of the league. The NFL is always better when those teams are playing at a high level, right?
Of course.
And those teams
agreed.
are continuing to win. So that was also one of those years, right, where like the Bears were legitimately good. And so oddly enough, like when they're good, you just seem to enjoy football way more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last one I have to bring up is Cleo Mack. You guys traded for Cleo Mack. He came in that season. He had, in his first 4 games, he had 5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. I remember watching that. He was just on a rampage. And the weird thing about that is he was actually, I don't know if he was hurt during that time, but he missed the next 2 games after that, ended up still with the 12-sack season. I mean, you guys had to have been on top of the world. Like, we made the right move. This was worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about the Khalil Mack trade. I had known prior to the Bears actually the trade being announced that the Bears were in on Khalil Mack, just because as a journalist you go around and you kind of make connections with certain people, and then you get a read for like just what's going on in the NFL in general, just across the league, So I'd always known that the Bears weren't on Khalil Mack. Now, in terms of were they actually going to pull off and make a trade for him, I was never really entirely sure about it. But kind of, there's a funny story with the trade because, like, I had a good friend of mine, who's been my best friend since 5th grade. I was living in the city of Chicago at the time in an apartment, and my friend texted me on Friday night and he's just like, hey, I'm going to be in Chicago tomorrow. And I'm like, all right, let's go ahead. Let's meet up. And so it was a super rainy day, and they announced what had happened is this. I told my friend, I'm like, hey, listen, when you leave, because he was coming from like an hour away from the suburbs. I'm like, when you're on the train, dude, just shoot me a phone call, and then I will wake up, and I'll get ready and I'll meet you at the train station. And so that's exactly what we did. And so he called me around like 7:30 in the morning, and then for like the next 10 minutes, I just went ahead and I like laid in bed, and I'm like, all right, I'll get up, in like whatever, a couple minutes, and then 7:38 a.m. I see the news is breaking that the Bears are trading for Cleo Mack. And so really that entire day was just filled with super high expectations, right? The Bears had a solid offseason that year, hiring Matt Nagy. They got Allen Robinson, they got Roquan Smith, they got three, and then you top it off with Khalil Mack, with a much anticipated Packers matchup coming up, was, and then everything that came after in terms of the 12-4 season was honestly like a super cool moment. So, the Bears, they made the right move, I feel like, and they got the better end of the deal, just because you look at like, who did the Raiders get? I mean, well, they got like Josh Jacobs, they got a cornerback too, and let's be real, like, are any of those guys going to have an impact even similar or at the same level of what Khalil Mack's having, or going to continue to have? Probably not. And I would say for all the people out there that are like, well, Khalil Mack's not very good because he just doesn't like, pad the stat sheet. I think when it comes to player evaluation, one of the big things we have to understand is that if your, argument for player evaluation is the stats, then that's not necessarily an argument, because there's so much that players do that is not reflected in the stat sheet.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, 100%.
The players that the Raiders picked right now aren't looking too well. Justin, I mean, even their I think he was third overall or fourth, Cleveland Farrell. I mean, he was supposed to be the replacement. I mean, come on.
They already trying to replace him already with Yannick Ngakoue. They just signed him for a 2-year deal.
Just brought him in. Maybe they're trying to do a tandem thing, but even Yannick,
Max Crosby is outplaying him, man. So.
Yeah, even Yannick and Crosby, they're nothing compared to Cleo Mack. So
nothing at all.
All right, we know every year, you don't make it to the Super Bowl. It's not a playoff win. What is your worst memory being a Bears fan? It could be a player that left. It could be, of course, the Super Bowl loss or a player injury or something like that, draft bust.
Let's see. Yeah, worst memory would honestly be the Randall Cobb touchdown back in 2013, because the defensive coordinator at the time, Mel Tucker, decided to like rush 8 and like drop 3 into coverage. And so I felt like the Bears had that game completely locked up, but they just did not make a smart decision. And you look back at it and you do realize, like, okay, what could have been had Chicago gone ahead and legitimately, made, or, that play doesn't happen. Like the Bears sneak into the playoffs with the number 2 offense. And then what happens from there? So that's always going to be one of those like what if memories.
Yeah,
that was definitely a weird one, because you guys were 8-8. The Packers were 8-7-1. And that was the difference between the playoff seeding, was that last game of the season and their tie. So that's a tough one. The Randall Cobb is a 48-yard touchdown. Came with 38 seconds left in the game. You guys you guys lost 33-28. So that's a tough one. I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
One thing that I have to bring up, just because I always look back at the draft too. You guys drafted Kevin White. I mean, I liked him. I know a lot of people liked him coming out of West Virginia. He was the number 7th overall pick, and his career was just injury filled every year. It seemed like it. But do you remember how you felt drafting Kevin White that year? Were you high on him? Did you want someone else?
Yeah, see, I think it's interesting when we talk about Kevin White, because clearly the approach that Ryan Pace took was, he knew that Jay Cutler was not going to be the future quarterback for the Bears. And so the Bears couldn't get out of Cutler's contract, right? And so kind of what they did was say, hey, listen, let's go ahead and let's build up Kevin White, or let's go ahead and let's build up the roster before we go ahead and draft whoever our quarterback of the future is going to be. And then obviously the thought process was, because Alshon Jeffrey had about like 2 or 3 years remaining on his deal too. And so the thought process was that you were going to have Jeffrey and Kevin White become a solid 1-2 tandem, so that both could go ahead and end up being really good and ready to go and develop for the next whoever the quarterback was going to be post Cutler. So you look at it, and the thing with Kevin White was this: is how many times have we seen like first round picks completely just flame out, not because they're bad players or anything, but more so just because of their injuries that they have, right?
Yeah.
And again, the injuries are a completely uncontrollable aspect of the game.
Of course.
Especially knowing that anything can kind of happen at any moment. So yeah, I was a bit bummed out about Kevin White, but then again, it's just like there's certain things that you can't control, and injuries is just one of them.
Like you mentioned, I mean, even first round picks are 50-50. I mean,
Definitely.
at least half of the guys fail, but 2015 was a horrible draft class for wide receivers. I forget who it was in 2014, but I think that was one of the best draft classes for wide receivers.
Yeah, you got
so
Evans,
coming into
Odell,
this
and all
one,
them.
people are loading up. This is just in the first two rounds. The first wide receiver, Amari Cooper, then Kevin White, Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, Brashard Perriman, Philip Dorsett, Devin Smith, Ordell Green Beckham. I don't know if you remember him, but
Yeah.
I mean, out of all those guys,
Missouri.
pretty much Amari Cooper is the only guy that's had any success or at least Pro Bowls out of that group. And you look later on in the draft, two guys that I noticed that were in the third round, Tyler Lockett, who might be a product of his quarterback, but a great player, and one of my favorite players in the NFL, Stephon Diggs. I don't really remember why he fell that low. Another guy, Jamison Crowder, but Diggs, I don't know how he fell that low above all these guys, man. It might just be a different NFL where those guys that I just named above in the first two rounds are really big body guys that could do some good contested catch stuff, maybe except for Philip Dorsett.
Whoa.
But Diggs, so solid, man.
We just got some breaking news.
Let's hear it. Break it.
All right. So the Bengals signed Trey Hendrickson to a 4-year, $60 million contract with $32 million of that guaranteed.
Yeah, Trey Hendrickson, a guy he definitely shined. He might have shined because he had a great person on the opposite side of him. But hey, he cashed in this year. When I watched Saints games, it seems like he was making plays. So, guys are going to be reaching for these playmakers, especially on defense.
Definitely.
You got anything on that?
Yeah, I think more so what it is, it's like for the Bengals, right? They have their quarterback there in Joe Burrow. I mean, I don't think AJ Green's going to be back. So you have guys like T. Higgins, this offseason for them is going to be more so about how can we continue to add to the roster to build around Joe Burrow. And part of building around Joe Burrow is also getting some guys that are going to go ahead and, get after the passer so that Joe Burrow does not have to do everything himself. And you look at just in terms of the impact for the Saints, like the Saints are going to go through an offseason of transition, right? I mean, yeah, they're bringing back Jameis Winston. I mean, yeah, they have Taysom Hill, but then you also look at it and you realize, okay, yeah, they have Kamara and Michael Thomas, and Sean Payton's always going to keep them afloat. But the Saints, if anything, anytime you lose a quarterback of Drew Brees' caliber, I think you're going to take a couple steps back. And people are not going to say it outward that the Saints are going to regress a bit just because, again, it's the Saints. And I mean, there was a point where with the Saints, right, they were going 7-9, scoring like 50 plus points every single game, right, when they had no talent before they reloaded. So the Saints have a nice core, but I just think they're going to take a step back in 2021.
I got a question for you as a journalist. Is Taysom Hill a quarterback?
Taysom Hill's not a quarterback.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean, they re-signed Jameis Winston, so they saved themselves there. But I mean, thank you.
I expect Winston to be the guy there. Taysom Hill, I don't think is a quarterback. I was not impressed at all this past year.
Yeah,
I'll leave it at that.
For me, Jameis is interesting because he is a guy that I think has everything needed to play quarterback at a high level in the NFL. It's just the issue with him is this is just like, it's kind of like Mitch Trubisky too, right? These guys have all the talent in the world
between the years,
really good starting quarterbacks, but the issue with them is that they just can't put it together. And sometimes we also have to understand that like it's also just bad coaching that tends to hold back talented quarterbacks more than people are willing to admit. And part of the problem is also this, is that there's just this kind of culture that's been created in terms of just when teams are winning and everything's great, who's getting all the love? Well, the quarterback is, right? But when teams are losing and they're not doing great, who's getting all the hate? The quarterback is. Now there's going to be exceptions to every single rule. Like, in my eyes, Pat Mahomes played a freaking terrible Super Bowl. And for a guy who some people are already calling the GOAT or are saying is the future GOAT or comparing to Michael Jordan, like, Pat Mahomes played like absolute trash. And again, everyone's going to be like, well, the receivers did this and he didn't have his offensive line. But just the reality of the situation is that if you're a generational type quarterback, like some people are saying you are, you need to be able to overcome those deficiencies, because true generational type quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers or even Brett Favre, for example, have overcome those before.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally agree.
So let's bring it back to the Bears. So we brought up Kevin White, who's on the 49ers now. I'm just curious. I'm just trying to tie it all together. When you guys traded up one spot with the 49ers to draft Mitchell Trubisky, what was your initial reaction as a Bears fan and as a journalist?
You know, as a fan, I was like, okay, this is definitely surprising, just because my consensus, everyone's consensus as a journalist and as a fan, right? My consensus number one guy that year was Deshaun Watson, and it's not hard to see why. Now, as a fan, I was like, okay, this is an interesting move. And certainly as a journalist, my viewpoint was the same as well, right? Of this is an interesting move. But I will say this, that as a journalist, you know, I also approached the Trubisky trade up from this angle, is that you just got done with 8 years of up and down with Jay Cutler. All right. Mike Glennon was not going to be your future at the quarterback position. So you needed to go ahead and you needed to make a move, right? Yes. And people really tend to forget that in this league, if you don't swing at the quarterback position and you don't have the guts to go big, you're going to end up going home and you're going to lose your job more than people are willing to admit. Now, what happened after that is a totally separate discussion. But in the moment when you're picking that high and you need a quarterback, you need to make that move, because how many times have we seen, right? Teams get everything right but the quarterback position. And then as a result, for the next like 5, 6, 7 years, as they try to figure out the quarterback position, they're not picking high enough to like legitimately have an opportunity to get a real solution. The Bears are kind of in the same boat right now. So with Mitch in the moment, I understood why they made the move, because the Bears are a franchise that they're notorious for going swing and a miss when it comes to the QB position. So anytime you have an opportunity to address it, like they did in 2017, because the third overall pick was the highest that the team had picked since 1972, you go ahead and you make the move. And, you know, again, people are going to be like, well, they passed up on Watson and Mahomes. And it's like, okay, that's true. But at the end of the day, if your quarterback ends up being a solid starter, no one's going to give a damn who you passed up on. That's what matters the most, right? So people just look at it as the whole they passed up on Watson and Mahomes argument, but really, like, if you have a franchise quarterback in this league, that's good enough. Because like other major QB gurus like Mark Schofield, he's kind of told me this. He's been like, look, there's two types of quarterbacks in the NFL. There are guys that you win with and guys you win because of. And guys you win with include pretty much like 90% of the league, but guys you win because of include people like Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes. And so people have unfair expectations of the QB position simply because they've seen what a couple other top quarterbacks are able to do. And their whole thought process is, well, if this guy's not replicating that and having an MVP type season in year 2, he's not good enough. And it's just like, no, every team, every situation, every player is different.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm just tired of like all the hate you guys get for like saying, oh, you guys passed up on Patrick Mahomes. Like no one knew that Patrick Mahomes was going to be the player he was today, you know, for sure. I mean, I thought you guys traded up to get Deshaun Watson. I remember watching that live with a couple of friends, one of them a Bears fan. I was like, damn, you guys are going to get Watson. And then, nope, you guys get Trubisky. It was kind of a surprise pick for me.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was surprising, yeah, but then at the end of the day, like I said, I mean, if you have an opportunity to take a swing on a franchise quarterback, you have to do it, you know. And for all the folks that are like, oh, well, so-and-so teams passed up on or it's just the Bears are not the only team that year that passed up on Watson and Mahomes. Let's be honest. I mean,
9 other
there's a whole nine, like a handful of other teams did as well, right? And then you look at that and you realize, okay, how different would the outlook of the league be now had like the 49ers or had the Browns taken like Watson or Mahomes at first overall, or like the 49ers or the Jets, right? Then you're looking at a vastly different like landscape. Even the Jaguars, I would argue, were another team that passed up on Watson and Mahomes in favor of Blake Bortles. So, the thing with the QB position is it's got to come, as I'm saying this as a journalist, right? You have to know when to make the right move in the draft in terms of drafting a quarterback. But then you also can't go ahead and, make the move a year too late or something, because if you make it a year too late, and you're like, oh, we'll just wait till next year because next year we anticipate a better QB class. You can't gamble. You can't always gamble on next year. You have to make certain moves in the moment. And with QB, it's one of those things.
Yep.
It's like the great, manager of Dunder Mifflin, Michael Scott, said, you miss 100%. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, you know what I mean?
There you go. Let's move on a little bit to the future expectations for the Bears.
Yeah.
G, you got anything on franchise tags or anything like that?
I mean, let's see here. For the franchise tag.
There's one.
No, I mean, I'm talking about as far as like picking up the 5th-year option of Roquan Smith. Okay. Do you guys see picking that up first of 10 mil? I think it's like around $10 million, maybe in some change. Or do you guys extend him first? What do you see first coming?
So I think they're going to go ahead and pick up the 5th-year option first, just because that would be the smart thing to do. Because then what you're doing at that point is you're committing to Roquan Smith through the 2022 season. And then what you're going to go ahead and do is figure out an extension for him next off season, right? Because right now the Bears do have limited salary cap space and there's other needs that they need to address. And the hope is that fans are back into Soldier Field by 2020 or for the 2021 season. And so as a result of that, the extra revenue that's going to go ahead and come in is going to allow the Bears to kind of extend Roquan Smith next offseason. And I will say this, I think that when we look at him, like he's one of the few young middle linebackers that's like next in line to get paid. And I think that he's going to go ahead and reset because Roquan Smith is just super underrated, right? Not necessarily as appreciated as he should be. So he's going to go ahead and he's going to get his contract. And then you're going to have these other guys that are, these other first round guys like Devin White, for example, even Devin Bush, who's with Pittsburgh, Leighton Van Der Esch, even with the Cowboys, like they'll go ahead and get their bags soon. Right. But, the Bears extending Roquan, it's not a priority right now. They don't have to do it this off season, but they will eventually get it done at some point in 2022.
Yeah. And like Duran said, as far as the free agents, you guys expressed a tag to Allen Robinson now, didn't you?
Yeah, so Allen Robinson's been franchise tagged, but he's yet to sign his tender. And so that I think is something that's truly at a point of no return because both sides have kind of gone ahead and tried to work something out, but both sides have kind of been stubborn. And, from Allen Robinson's perspective, he was the 17th highest paid wide receiver in football this year. And he had the right to feel disrespected because there's guys like Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, both with the Rams, that are making significantly more money than him. Even Stephon Diggs, right, I think is like 16th highest paid in the NFL. And so ultimately with Allen Robinson, just what it is that if he makes more than 20 million a year, because Michael Thomas right now makes 19.25 million a year, Allen Robinson essentially right now is being asked to be paid like a top 3 receiver in the game. And he's performed like it. But then again, it's just like the Bears have, they are not a team that's going to make like a lot of players like their highest paid in the game unless they absolutely have to. Because it was the same thing with Cleo Mack 3 years ago. The Bears didn't want to make him the highest paid defensive player in the game. But then Max Party was like, look, this isn't happening and we're not accepting a trade here unless Khalil Mack is the highest paid defensive player in the game. So they have about 4 months to get, so the franchise tag deadline is July 15th, they have about 4 months now to get a deal worked out. I do think something's going to happen. It's just going to be a matter of what happens at the quarterback position though.
Yep. Yeah. So you guys have, some free agents, you have Massey, Trubisky, Screen, Patterson, Pat Odell. Let's
do offensive players first.
Oh, okay. So you mean off the top, you have Massey, you have Trubisky, you have Cordell Patterson.
There you go.
And then, that's it for as far as
they got Jermaine Ifedi, who led the league, who led the team in offensive snaps. They also have Rashawn Coward on the offensive line. Is there one of those guys that you'd want to bring back on the offensive side?
Honestly, I would probably say Ifedi. I would not bring Cordell or Patterson back because here's the thing, right? I mean, paying because 2019 he signed a 2-year, $10 million deal. $5 million is way too much for a gadget player and a kick returner. Trubisky, I do not see him being back at all unless the Bears have absolutely zero options at quarterback. And then you look at Massey. I mean, Massey's just one of those classic cases where it's just like, if he's willing to take a pay cut, you bring him back. But him being an older veteran, I do not anticipate him being back. And teams make those types of older veteran cuts every single year. I'd actually argue that since Mitchell Schwartz is out there now, and Mitchell Schwartz has played with under Matt Nagy before, Mitch Schwartz would be a big upgrade, even
like
though
that.
both
Good
guys
call.
are like the
Yeah.
same age.
Yeah, I
Good
like
call.
that one a lot. So, anything else on the
Defensive
offensive side, Duran?
Defensive side.
So I know you guys locked up Edwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
You guys recently locked up Edwards, so you guys got Buster Screen. You guys got Robertson Harris. Let's see here. I'm looking at
Tayshaun Gibson.
Tayshaun Gibson. You guys got John Jenkins. Mingo looks more just like a
I think that's about it.
Yeah, that's about it. You got Artie Burns, who's out there.
No. Is there one of those guys you want to bring back?
Or any free agents out there that you do want?
Honestly, so of the Bears free agents right now, I would go ahead and I would bring back Barkevious Mingo just because, again, the guy's a former first-round pick, but he played really well in 2020, especially for a rotational and a depth guy. And then Sean Gibson, someone else that I would also consider bringing back, but just my biggest fear is that I'm not sure if Gibson, might have actually outplayed his way out of the Bears price range. And plus the safety market's been kind of like dry anyway, aside from John Johnson, the third signing today with the Cleveland Browns. So, I would say bring back Mingo, bring back Tashawn Gibson on the defensive side of the ball, because a lot of these other positions, like at cornerback, Artie Burns, you could bring him back as a former first rounder. But then again, it's just like the Bears have Duke Shelley, they have Kendall Vilder, they have Jalen Johnson. So they have some options at cornerback. So not necessarily too concerned about like cornerback. I would just say bring back Mingo and Gibson for sure, though.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. So when it comes to the draft, is there anybody that you're looking for in particular? I mean, you guys hold the 20th pick overall. Do you see yourself trading up, staying where you are?
So there's a number of ways this could go, right? Because the Bears are not going to trade back in the first round. I mean, they've never done it under Ryan Pace. I mean, there's a point during the 2018 draft, and that's the last time the Bears had a first round pick, right? Because their 2019 and 2020 first rounders went to Vegas for Khalil Mack. But the Bears tried to trade up twice in the first round in 2018. All right. And they were picking top 10 that year. So I have a feeling, if the Bears trade up, right, then you go for a quarterback, and you go for a quarterback like Trey Lance or Justin Fields, just because I do not think that they will have an opportunity to grab Zach Wilson, because Zach Wilson's been a guy that's shown comparisons to, like, in terms of his play style, to Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes,
Wilson.
right? Even Russell Wilson.
Yeah, backyard style quarterback.
Right. So I would say, trade up for a guy like Fields or Trey Lance. And then if you decide to stay pat at 20th overall and you somehow figure out your quarterback position, but you don't give up a first round pick in the process at 20th overall, I would say go ahead and look at offensive tackle, right? Look at that right tackle position. There's a couple guys like Notre Dame's Liam Eichenberg, Northwestern's Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw even. Dylan Raduns from North Dakota State University. This is a very deep year to grab your offensive tackles. It's also a really deep year to grab a playmaker. So at 20th overall, if the Bears are feeling it and they somehow land Trent Williams and figure out right tackle and bring in like Mitchell Schwartz, you know what? You have a really good offensive line. So now go out and get yourself another playmaker to pair with Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney.
Yeah. That'd be a good one. If you solidify that line for sure, I think any quarterback would want to play behind that line. I hope you guys don't get Trent Williams. I hope he signs back with the 49ers. But yeah, man. I mean, you guys are in that, that market for sure. So who knows?
Anything else for Draft G? I got a couple coach questions.
No, nothing else for the draft. Go ahead.
So I think we know Nagy at this point. I know Bill Lazor, but your new coach, Sean Dassey, is that how you say it? Desai. I mean, I don't know much about him. He's your defensive coordinator. I know he's replacing Chuck Pagano at this point. Do you feel like, you have your offensive guy with Nagy, so this guy is going to be taking over half of the team pretty much on the defensive side. Do you think he could handle it? Do you have faith in him? Do you have a couple question marks?
I think Sean can handle it. And it's interesting because I actually host a podcast, the Barely Hibernating podcast with Sean's stepnephew. So the entire family's just like super fired up to have Sean. Every time I had an opportunity to just listen to Sean talk, you get a feel for just who he is as a person, right? And then as a coach, and you look at the introductory press conference that he had a couple of weeks ago, he made some really good comments there, about what he wants the Bears to be. So this is a defensive coordinator that a lot of people do not have an idea about, but he's got a really good idea of what it takes to play the game at a high level and what goes into a really solid defense. Sean's background's interesting because like it's someone that has he's at a background education. He's actually the longest tenured coach right now on the Bears staff because he's been here since the Mark Trestman days. So anytime you have a guy that outlasts, two coaching regimes and then sticks around for a third and then eventually gets the promotion, there should only be good things that are going to come from that.
Nice. Anything else, G, for coaching wise?
No, nothing else for coaching wise.
Anything? I think that about wraps it up for me. I think we covered the draft. We covered some contract stuff and coaching. So if there's anything else, that's it from me.
Yeah, that's definitely it for me. Again, if you want to plug your work and where we can find you, just one last time for the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of plugging my work, right? So you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Usayd Koshul. So I cover the Bears for Bear Report, which is part of 247 Sports. I cover Chicago sports for Fanside. It's the Windy City with an emphasis on the Chicago Bears. And then my other main job also includes doing 2 podcasts a week. So I do the Picks for Pace podcast, which is part of Bear Report and Blue Wire Pods. So I cover college football and the NFL draft there from a Chicago Bears perspective. And then I also do the Barely Hibernating podcast with Blue Wire Hustle, which again is just something fun that we do. That's also for, just like another Bears podcast that's out there with AJ Desai and Sam Stevenson. So, follow me on all social media platforms, guys. DMs are always open if you want to go ahead and, talk about anything football related. If you guys want me on, any podcasts, let me know. And we can honestly always work something out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll put all the descriptions below. I know I'm probably going to hit up your DMs for sure. I mean, I want to pick your brain. I love this interview. It was so awesome. If you can stick around for a bit after, that'd be amazing. But again, follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Why We're Fans. We're also on TikTok. Shout out to our manager right now, Rob Yunez. Appreciate it so much. Yeah, Durant, anything else before we sign it off?
That's it, man. Good to go.
That's it for us, man. Cheers.
Cheers. Have a good one.